Hey everybody, welcome back to Sounds Like a Drum, Cadence Independent Media production. Today, we are talking about a problem that plagues, I would say, maybe all drummers, and that is wildly overcorrecting when you're hearing an issue with the sound you're making. This is a thing that I still fight today when I'm especially in a hurry or freaking out about the way that things are sounding and I'm under the gun and I gotta get it going. And this has to do with the overall sound of every drum in the kit. Today we're gonna focus on the snare drum and we're gonna spend some time with the rack tom and dive into how when you hear an issue that might sound really dramatic, it doesn't mean that the fix is as dramatic as how freaky that sound is. Also, please follow the link below over to our Patreon where you can find all sorts of extra content from the channel here, as well as anecdotes, including some from today about a particularly famous drummer who discovered some interesting things pertaining to what we're talking about today. First up today is the snare drum. Now, let's listen to how this is sounding right now. Now this drum is tuned in the range that we want it in, and generally it's behaving as it should, but we're having some struggles with dynamics in the center of the drum in particular, which is giving us a choked sound, a really short sound, unpleasant, and feels really stiff to hit. The first thing that I would think of to try out to alleviate this problem is to reduce the tension on the snare wires just by relaxing the snare wire tension knob on the mechanism. Where this can start to go off the rails is overshooting where we need to go with this and ending up with wires that are too loose and getting frustrated in another direction. So let's look and see just how little of an adjustment we need to make on the mechanism to get us into a much more comfortable and dynamic sound from the drum. Now this is a great middle-of-the-road sound. It's giving us dynamics, it's giving us a lot of great tone, and it doesn't feel choked under the sticks anymore. But on the other hand, if we were to overcompensate and really loosen the wires up, we're going to lose articulation, we're going to lose some of the sort of clarity in the center of the drum. But at the same time, a super loose snare sound can be very fun for certain styles, certain feels, and break things up a little bit. It turns out that we really only needed to turn the knob on the mechanism about a half turn, and that seems like very little to me given how much tension wires can be under, but it was more than enough to get us to a more open sound without that choked feel in the center. A great way as you're adjusting things to check and make sure that you're getting what you need is to gently tap the center of the drum while you turn the knob on the mechanism. You can hear every gradient along the way and end up exactly where you want to be. Now, if we were to go really far in loosening the wires, we're shooting way past the point of our middle ground sound that we wanted in the first place, we end up with a lot of slop in the wires and not very much articulation. But this is still a usable sound. It might just not be the sound that we were looking for in the first place. Back to the choked sound now. The thing that we need to know about this kind of tone out of the drum, if we're fussing with this kind of thing, is that it really affects a certain portion of the dynamic range. And if we're not playing quietly and not concerned with getting a lot of snare wire response at lower dynamics, if we're just hitting hard and swinging for the fences, this can actually be a usable tone that is not actually going to be detrimental to the way that you're playing. And if you are playing with ghost notes and digging into different dynamics, it is somewhat referential to R&B, James Brown, situations like that where they want a really tight sound out of the snare drum, and choking it out is actually getting them the thing that they're after. Now moving on to the rack tom. This is a sound that I get run into a lot on backline sets, and also when I hear people playing where they want a big sound and they're tuning pretty low, but they might be struggling with evening out the sound of the drum overall. We've gone ahead and checked over the batter head and discovered that two non-opposing lugs are somewhat significantly lower in pitch than the rest, and those are contributing to this buzzy sound that we're getting. It turned out that it was only about a quarter of a turn, which is a very insignificant amount of turning of a drum key, but on a tom like this that's not at a very high tension, it makes a huge difference, and this is where we can really get totally screwed around by adjusting things too dramatically and making the whole problem worse. Hearing a drum head that's out of tune can send us into a whole whirlwind of confusion about what lugs we should be turning and how much. And the most important thing is to identify the offending ones first and tune them up little increments at a time, listening all the way so that we don't overshoot or find ourselves starting to adjust other ones that aren't actually that far from where we need everything to be. If we jump on the lugs that are too low and just start cranking away, we're going to find ourselves in a situation where we're going up and down and up and down and never landing on the tone that we're looking for, when if we just go a tiny bit at a time and really listen, we can land on it pretty easily, and this doesn't have to take a ton of time. An all too common occurrence when experiencing the issue we started out with this drum is to identify this sound and go, the whole drum is just tuned too low, and that's the problem, and going around and raising the pitch on all of the lugs rather than identifying those that are actually causing the issue, which in the case of this one, there's only two that are actually lower. This results in a drum that's now pitched up out of the range that we wanted in the first place and is still not in tune with itself. We've lost some of the buzz, but now the drum itself has some other issues going on in the overtones and feels a little choky under the sticks. As a listener, you might feel, as I do, that this is totally a usable sound under some circumstances, and if it's pleasing to us and we're feeling like getting a little experimental, it can fit into a variety of contexts. It's not a sound for every day, but none of these things are, and when we're starting to experiment, it does mean that we might find things that are not the most run-of-the-mill sound, but can excite us for certain experimental grooves and things like that. Jumping back to our original growly, freaky sound on this tom, the same is true of this sound. It's all about context. We've all heard music before that had a sound in the drumming that was not maybe what we would have chosen, but was inspiring to those musicians. And even with this, if we take ourselves out of expectation and decide to try this instrument out in this fashion, there is still inspiration to be found in there. Depending on what you're doing with your creativity and your drumming, any sound on the set can be appropriate for the music that you're making, in the same way that Phil Collins' tom sound is appropriate for some things, but we wouldn't necessarily trot it out for others. This means for us that we also don't need to be afraid of any of these sounds that get labeled as wrong or bad or broken or any of that. But we also want to know how to alleviate them if it's not what we want, and get us to something that can be more ordinary for that day and then come back to the experimental later. When we find ourselves struggling with part of the drum set, at the end of the day, we want the shortest path to a solution for the issue that we're experiencing. And what we're talking about here with both of these drums is the idea of not rushing to a conclusion, and instead using our ears, moving incrementally a little bit at a time, and making sure that we understand the changes that we're making and just how drastic those changes are, so that we can get to the sound that we're looking for, and maybe find something interesting along the way as well. This can mean making sure that you're identifying what lugs on the tom are acting up if you're getting a growly sound. If you're a person that finds yourself uncomfortable with the tension of your snare wires all the time, slow down, dig a little bit deeper, try to identify exactly what's bothering you so that you can find the resolution that you're looking for and not get mired up in changing things endlessly, never being happy. No matter what, when we're sitting down at the drums, we want to be happy with the sound we're making, and we're really glad that you came along on this journey with us today into the minutia of doing that with a couple of issues on the kit. These are things that we run into every day here at the studio. We're always making these adjustments, and we're always kind of like cajoling each other to make sure that we're not hustling too much, so that we actually know what's happening, not just so it's good today, but also so we can recreate it in the future. And as always, please like, comment, subscribe, click the notification bell, and follow the link to the Patreon below, where you can see more from today, anecdotes, cymbal series, all the things we have going on. Help us to keep this channel going. It's our direct line of support from you, the viewers. And lastly, your solutions, your experiences with overcompensating when you're trying to adjust something on the kit. It can be tuning, wires, tape, moon gels, whatever.